A cancer drug that costs about $150,000 a year in the United States might work just as well at a fraction of the dose, not half, not a quarter. We're talking about a sliver of what wealthy patients receive, and the survival numbers are holding up. This is one of the quietest revolutions happening in oncology right now, and almost nobody outside the field is talking about it. The drug in question is nivolumab, sold as Opdivo, one of the headline immunotherapies of the last decade. It belongs to a class called checkpoint inhibitors, the kind of treatment that won a Nobel Prize and rewrote how doctors think about melanoma, lung cancer, and head and neck tumors. It is also, by almost any measure, brutally expensive. In rich countries, it is a budget line. In poorer countries, it is a fantasy. But a trial presented at the 2026 ASCO meeting, the biggest cancer conference in the world, is forcing a very awkward question into the open. What if the standard dose has been wrong the whole time? Not wrong in the sense of unsafe, wrong in the sense of wildly more than the body actually needs. The trial looked at patients with head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. This is a nasty disease. It tends to be diagnosed late. It disfigures, it kills, and it is disproportionately common in low and middle income countries where tobacco, alcohol, and certain viral infections combine in the worst possible way. In India alone, head and neck cancers make up a huge share of the cancer burden. For most of these patients, a drug like nivolumab is not on the menu. It is not even on the same planet as the menu. So researchers tried something the original manufacturers never had a financial reason to try. They gave patients an ultra-low dose of nivolumab, and then they watched what happened. According to the reporting from Stat News, the low dose extended survival in patients with advanced head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. Not marginally, meaningfully, enough that it could realistically change how this disease is treated in places where the full-price version will never arrive. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how drug dosing actually gets decided in the first place. The honest answer is that it often doesn't get optimized the way most people assume. When a pharmaceutical company runs early trials, they are trying to prove the drug works and prove it is safe. They are not trying to find the smallest possible effective dose. In fact, there is a quiet incentive to land on a higher dose, because a higher dose is more likely to show a clear effect, and a clear effect is what gets you approved. Once a dose is locked in by regulators, it tends to stay locked in. Nobody goes back and asks whether a third of that amount would have worked just as well, because nobody is paid to ask. Independent researchers, especially those working in countries where the full dose is simply unaffordable, have started asking anyway. And what they keep finding across multiple checkpoint inhibitors is that the biology saturates much earlier than the labeling suggests. The receptors these drugs target are not infinite. Once they are blocked, adding more drug doesn't add more benefit. It just adds cost and side effects and waste. The head and neck cancer trial is part of a larger movement sometimes called dose optimization or interventional pharmacoeconomics, which is a mouthful that essentially means asking whether we are using drugs intelligently or just expensively. The pioneers of this field have argued for years that some of our most celebrated cancer drugs are being given at doses 2, 3, even 4 times higher than necessary. If they are right, the implications are enormous. It would mean that the cost barrier keeping immunotherapy out of most of the world is partly artificial. It would mean that a patient in Mumbai or Lagos or Manila could be treated with the same molecule as a patient in Boston, just at a dose calibrated to what the body actually uses, at a price that a public health system can absorb. This is not a generic. It is not a knockoff. It is the same drug made by the same companies given in smaller amounts. And that is precisely what makes it threatening to the existing business model. Because if a tenth of the dose works, the math on a $150,000 a year treatment starts to look very different. Insurance companies notice, health ministries notice, patients notice. The head and neck cancer result is particularly striking because this is not a cancer where immunotherapy was a marginal player. Checkpoint inhibitors have become a genuine pillar of treatment for advanced disease. Adding nivolumab to standard chemotherapy has extended lives in trial after trial. The question was never whether the drug works. The question was who gets to use it. And until now, the answer has been a depressingly small slice of the global population. Consider the numbers. Head and neck squamous cell carcinoma kills hundreds of thousands of people every year worldwide. The overwhelming majority of those deaths happen in low and middle income countries. The standard of care that has been built up over the last decade in wealthy nations is for most of those patients theoretical. They get older chemotherapy regimens, palliative radiation, or nothing at all. The gap between what is possible and what is available has been one of the great moral failures of modern oncology. A low-dose strategy doesn't close that gap entirely, but it cracks it open. If you can deliver an effective course of nivolumab for a small fraction of the current cost, suddenly public hospitals can stock it. Suddenly national formularies can list it. Suddenly the conversation shifts from whether a patient can mortgage their family's future for a chance at survival to whether the local cancer center has the drug on the shelf. There are caveats, and they matter. A single trial, even a positive one, is not the end of the conversation. Researchers will want to see the data replicated in different populations with longer follow-up. The exact dose, the schedule, the patient selection, all of that needs to be refined. Some patients may still need higher doses. Combination regimens may behave differently, and the side effect profile at lower doses needs to be characterized carefully because even a cheap drug can be harmful if it is used carelessly. There is also the political dimension. Pharmaceutical companies are not naturally enthusiastic about studies that suggest their products could be sold for less. The trials driving the low-dose movement are largely being run by academic researchers, government-funded groups, and clinicians in countries where the existing pricing model has already failed. Bristol Myers Squibb, the company that markets nivolumab, did not run this trial. They had no commercial reason to. The work is being done, in many cases, by people who watched their patients die because they could not afford the standard of care, and decided to ask whether the standard of care was really standard or just inherited. This pattern, by the way, is showing up across oncology. Researchers have looked at low doses of pembrolizumab, another checkpoint inhibitor, with similar signals. They have looked at lower doses of certain targeted therapies in breast and lung cancer. They have looked at extending the interval between doses. So a drug that is normally given every 2 weeks might be given every 4 or 6, with no apparent loss of effect. Every time the question is asked rigorously, the answer keeps coming back the same. We are using more drug than we need to. If that is true at scale, it changes the economics of cancer care globally, not just in poor countries, in rich ones too. The American healthcare system spends staggering sums on oncology drugs every year. Some of that spending is buying real benefit. Some of it increasingly looks like it is buying excess dose that the body discards. Insurance premiums reflect that. Public budgets reflect that. Patient bankruptcies reflect that. The reason this isn't a bigger story, frankly, is that it is uncomfortable for almost everyone involved. It is uncomfortable for drug companies who set the original prices. It is uncomfortable for regulators who approved the original doses. It is uncomfortable for oncologists who have been prescribing those doses for years. And it is uncomfortable for patients in wealthy countries who have to wonder whether some of what they were given was unnecessary. But for a patient with advanced head and neck cancer in a country where the full price drug was never an option, none of that discomfort matters. What matters is that there is now evidence that a treatment they were told they could not have might be deliverable in a form they actually can. A low-dose, low-cost regimen that extends survival is not a compromise, it is a lifeline. The trial presented at ASCO will not be the last word, but it is a signal that some of the most expensive medicines in the world may be priced for a dose that the human body never asked for. A signal that the geography of who lives and who dies from cancer is partly a function of pharmacology decisions made decades ago, in rooms where cost was somebody else's problem. The body, it turns out, is not impressed by sticker prices. It responds to the drug it needs in the amount it needs, and not a milligram more. The question now is whether the rest of medicine is willing to listen.